January 4th, 2007, and at home, a cricketing legend is about to take his final victim.
And that's put away beautifully.
After a remarkable 15-year Test career, Shane Warne was retiring from Test cricket. Here in Sydney, it's day 3 of the 5th Ashes Test.
And gone. He's stumped. He was always going to come down. A shame for Shane Warne, but at the same time, what a mighty innings.
It was a match that would see Australia's pace attack take 17 wickets between them. Even with less opportunity, Warne would still do what Warne does best. Test wicket 708, Andrew Flintoff gone for 7, stumped Gilchrist, bowled Warne. The day after, with Glenn McGrath and Justin Langer joining him, Shane would leave the Sydney Cricket Ground in Aussie Test whites for the final time of his career, helping Australia complete a 5-0 Ashes whitewash and reclaim the urn. A time for celebrating true sporting greatness and to admire the statue of a career that Warne himself and his bowling had built. But as the warm spotlight shone bright on that statue, it created a colder, more confronting silhouette behind it. From then on, whenever an Aussie Test 11 was chosen to wear the baggy green, the name SK Warne would never be there again. The 5th of January is day 1 of Australia's journey to answer a single question, on a day they've dreaded for 15 odd years. How does Australia replace cricket's greatest ever leg spinner? And as we'll see, this wouldn't be an easy task. To an outsider looking in, the question of replacing any player from a cricket team, even Shane Warne, seems fairly simple. Why can't you just swap them out for someone else? Dig deeper into the surface though, and you'll see it starts to get a bit more complicated than that. Now Shane's career is littered with records and amazing stats, but to illustrate my point, let's pick 3 numbers in particular. 708, 145 and 40,705. Let me explain. The number 708 is the number of Test wickets that Warne took in his career. Shane's nickname of the King of Spin is for good reason. His case was one of the rare few where his considerable cricket IQ was not limited to his physical abilities on the field. With a full range of deliveries and ability to play on basically any surface in world cricket, Shane took wickets wherever he went, whether it be around the legs, through the gate, both sides of the bat, or this.
Got him! There it is! Wicket number 700!
The number 145 is the number of Test caps that he earned. That is a significant amount of Test caps, which helped him build a considerable level of experience. Although he might not have ever been Australian Test captain, by the time of his retirement, he was the 4th most experienced Test player in Australian history. Right now, Warne's number of Test caps is only surpassed by 3 people, Alan Border, Steve Waugh and Ricky Ponting. But most importantly for me is the number 40,705. That's the number of deliveries he bowled in his Test career. Only Mutai Muralitharan and Anil Kumble have bowled more. What that number represents is trust. Warne didn't always have the best relationship with his captains, but he did have their trust on the field. And in return, he gave captains, especially those 3 that I mentioned a second ago, a sense of safety. Like in 1992, when Alan Border threw him the ball against the West Indies in Shane's first Test at the G. As the Windies chased 359 to win, he ended up with 7 for 52 to win the game. Or when Steve Waugh threw him the ball in Sharjah in 2002 against Pakistan, he took 5 wickets in the first innings and 8 for the match to win by an innings and 20 runs. Or 2006 in Adelaide, when Ricky Ponting brought him on and he took 4 for 49 in England's second innings, off 32 overs with 12 maidens, helping Australia turn a bore draw into a 2-0 Ashes lead. When those captains needed to get a hold of a match, slow down the run rate, or just throw the ball to someone and say, "Mate, we need a wicket," Shane Warne was that security blanket. Now this magician, game breaker, leader and security blanket was gone. They weren't just replacing a person, they had to somehow replace all of this with it. The selectors would have around 10 months to come up with their list of candidates before their next Test. And luckily for them, there'd already been one man penned in at the top for years, Stuart MacGill.
Gone, straight to Mark Taylor.
To the people that never got to see him bowl, Stewart was good, really good. He got his first baggy green in 1998, and by the time of Shane's retirement, he already had 40 test caps and almost 200 test wickets. If he had a different nationality, he might have had double that by now. A leg spinner who could turn it just as much as Shane could, with a wicked wrong-un to boot.
Got him this time. Oh, there you go.
The problem, or dare I say curse, was that Stuart MacGill had to contend with being stuck behind the greatest leg spinner of all time for most of his career. Stewart's Australian opportunities were largely restricted to when Warne was out injured or unavailable, tours to the subcontinent, or where tests at home prescribed a dual spin attack, most often in Sydney. But boy, didn't he shine on those rare occasions. After more than a decade of waiting, his full-time opportunity had finally come, with the Sri Lankan tour of Australia in 2007. But it wouldn't be as seamless a transfer as he, or Australia, would have hoped. By now, Stewart was in his mid-30s, and the rigours of a long professional cricket career had left its mark on his body. This wasn't helped either by an injury to his knee that he picked up during a Cricket Australia boot camp around a year earlier, one that still hindered him. Over those 2 tests, he would take 5 wickets, including his 200th test wicket in Brisbane. But his performances were hampered by that knee and another injury to his wrist on his bowling hand. After that series, while he avoided getting surgery on the knee, he would get surgery on his wrist. It would be diagnosed as carpal tunnel syndrome, ruling him out for the rest of that Aussie summer, including India's tour of Australia. And rather than blood a new spin bowler against what was a very strong India side, the selectors went for experience once again, with Brad Hogg as his replacement.
What a good bit of bowling! Bradley Hogg as his man!
Although he was a long-time stalwart of Australia's ODI side, he had only played 4 tests. This series would be very tight and very contentious for its own reasons. But while Hogg would play 3 of those 4 tests, he didn't have the greatest series performance-wise. Especially in Sydney and Adelaide, his match figures were 2 for 176 and 2 for 172 respectively. While these would be his last 2 test matches for Australia, he would continue to have a great limited overs career until retiring a year later. Or perhaps I should say, went on hiatus.
It is quite hard to get your front foot stuck in.
It's in the air, the field is there. It's David Warner, yes! And Brad Hogg has got a backward march going.
That India series though would be important to our story for another reason. In the 3rd test in Perth, Australia decides to toy with the idea of not having a dedicated spin bowler at all. See, Australia's pace stocks at that time included Brett Lee, Shaun Tate and Mitchell Johnson, 3 of the fastest bowlers in cricket history, and Stuart Clark, who at this point of his career was almost performing like Glenn McGrath 2.0. There was also the presence of Andrew Symonds and Michael Clarke in the middle order, both heavy run scorers who also bowled spin. Instead of trying to win games with that dedicated spin option, they might be able to lean further into their strong pace attack and their very strong batting lineup to try and win with spin bowling part-timers and all-rounders alone, as Australia picked a 4-pronged pace attack with no dedicated spinner at the whacker. Now the result was a bad one for Australia, losing by 72 runs, breaking a 16-test winning streak, the equal longest in test history in the process. But still, keep this theory in the back of your mind as we move forward with this story. Australia's next test destination was the Caribbean to face the West Indies. Stuart MacGill had recovered from that surgery to his right wrist and was past fit, going straight back into the side. But all was not right with Stuart's bowling. 4 for 143 were his match figures for the first test. They don't cause too much alarm on first glance, but looking more closely, the media were raising concern. To start, it's not unusual for leg spinners to go for runs. That's the nature of the beast. But for MacGill's high standards, he was not as threatening as he usually was. It might have had something to do with the surgery, but the ball as it came out of his hand didn't seem to be as assured and natural as it once did. The second test was similar. In the first innings, he went for 1 for 107 off 21 overs, going for over 5 and over. Michael Clarke came on in the same innings and took 2 for 20 off 15. 1 for 182 were his figures for the match.
Bowls a full toss and Chandapal says thank you very much and puts it away for boundary.
Partway through that second test, Stuart MacGill would announce that this test would be his last, abruptly retiring from international cricket mid-tour. Sadly, Father Time and injuries had taken their latest victim, denying McGill, who had been waiting so patiently for his shot, in the background, cementing one of cricket history's greatest what-ifs in the process. Leading 1-0 into the last test, the next man on the list might be one that you've never heard of. If the name Beau Casson doesn't immediately ring a bell, that's alright. He was a left-arm wrist spinner who played for the New South Wales Blues. He was also born in the suburbs of Perth, Western Australia, and like Stewart, Beau would also leave WA to New South Wales for better opportunities and friendlier bowling conditions. As Stewart was called up to the national team and then surgery, Beau was New South Wales' first choice spinner. Beau was picked as backup for Stewart on this tour, but it was more about the overall experience than specifically getting game time. Now he was thrust into a test debut at the Kensington Oval in Barbados, taking the vital wickets of Xavier Marshall and Dwayne Bravo.
And there's an appeal. Bravo is walking off, and that's it. Bravo doesn't wait for the umpire's finger to be raised.
He took 3 for 86 in the West Indies second innings, helping Australia to clinch the series 2-0. But as quickly as Beau played for Australia, he was out once again. The next series was in India, but Beau wasn't on that plane. The selectors dropped him and never picked him again. They opted to go into spin-friendly conditions with Bryce McGain and Jason Frazier. A selector was quoted as saying that this duo was the right combination. This wouldn't be the only surprise though, because when the 11 was named for the first test in Bengaluru, neither of that right combination were playing. Bryce McGain came down with an injury and Jason Frazier conceded none for 199 in a tour match before the tests began. Suddenly, that theory from before was back on the table. In India of all places, in lieu of picking a dedicated spinner or spinners, the selectors opted for an all-rounder to fill that role, namely Cameron White, with Michael Clarke and Simon Kadich bowling when asked to. This role though was almost a poison chalice for White. Cameron White would have a very successful career, domestically, internationally, and on the early T20 franchise circuit, as a heavy-hitting batter who could definitely bowl, but whose career seemed to be ever gravitating towards batting over bowling. Here, he had his test debut for Australia, but his performances would be judged publicly as a spin bowler first and a run scorer second, when he was perhaps suited for things to be the other way around. When viewed through that lens, his tight match figures of 1 for 88 off 31 in the first test weren't actually too bad. His first wicket, a memorable one.
Out! Tendulkar's gone, caught an extra cover. Cameron White has a crucial wicket.
White's time here in India though would never have that one defining spell of bowling. In that entire series there was only one time where he would get more than 1 wicket in an innings. After 3 tests, the series was 1-0 heading to Nagpur. While most of the bowling workload had been carried by a pool of pace options so far, including Lee, Johnson, Clarke, Siddle and Watson, Australia lacked that attacking spin threat that is so important in India. With a chance to retain the Border Gavaskar Trophy by drawing the series, Australia would pick a dedicated spinner alongside Cameron White for the final test, which was Jason Frazier, becoming Australian Test cap number 404. That test result, depending on the viewpoint, could be viewed from different angles. If you're an Indian fan, it was a series clinching victory by 172 runs, winning the Border Gavaskar Trophy back from Australia, and somewhat avenging the home series loss to them in 2004. If you're Australian, on one hand it was a disappointing loss, ending a series winning streak that stretched back to 2005, but had one potential bright spark. On debut, Jason Frazier and his aggressive style of spin bowling would take 8 for 215, equaling the record for the most wickets taken in a debut test innings, and his match figures were 12 for 358. Whichever way you preferred, Australia would be arriving home minus the Border Gavaskar Trophy. With that, the veneer of Australia as a team head and shoulders above the rest of the international pack had been damaged, severely, and as the home summer of 2008-09 rolled around, the damage would not be over. Australia's home test summer would include 2 visitors, New Zealand for 2 matches and South Africa for 3. And with figures of 12 for 358 in his debut, it would be logical to think that Jason Frazier would be a shoo-in for the first test of the summer. Well, perhaps not. The ramifications of Australia losing Warne, McGrath and Langer, not to mention Gilchrist later on, was front and centre of the selectors' minds. They knew that not only were Australia now closer to the rest of the world's test teams, but also that over the next few years they wouldn't be the last Aussie greats to retire. For the first time in almost a decade, the selectors had to pick a team that basically didn't pick itself. They had to start experimenting with new players and see how they went in certain conditions. This forced process of simultaneously breaking down and rebuilding the Australian test team had shined a microscope on the shallow pool of Australia's domestic spin bowling. There were a few contenders at the top of the list, many we've already seen, and some who could develop into something later down the track, but not much after that. The selectors' tendencies to chop and change spinners even if they had put on a decent performance, or simply just not picking a full-time spinner at all, would weigh further into the fray as well. Into the first test against New Zealand, a 4-prong pace attack and no Jason Krejcier would help Australia take the first test by 149 runs. The 7 overs of Aussie spin in that match completed by Andrew Symonds and Michael Clark.
That'll do it. That will do it. That is a really good 100 in this situation.
In between the first and second tests, Krejcier would pick up an ankle injury in training that ruled him out of selection. Bo Casson wasn't having a great Sheffield Shield. Bryce McGain was out recovering from shoulder surgery, and Cameron White wasn't in contention at all. Selectors went back to the list for choice number 6, Nathan Hauritz. Now Nathan already had a test cap back in 2004, but his bowling was a little different to the others we've seen so far. From Warne up until now, Australia had picked bowlers who were either wrist spinners or had an aggressive style of bowling, like Jason Krejcier. Basically, wicket takers first, even by stereotype alone. But Nathan was a different profile of bowler altogether. He was an accurate right arm off spinner that had the control to hold up an end and take a couple of wickets as well. That control though seemed to take priority. And Nathan's performance in the second test would do his chances for reselection no harm. Figures of 4 for 95 for the match at an economy rate of 2.37. Australia winning the series with an innings victory in Adelaide. There wouldn't be much time to savour it though, because off the coast of Perth, a perfect storm was brewing, destined to hit Australian cricket. Our spin bowling merry-go-round would continue to spin, but a cyclone was imminent, and its name was South Africa. At this point, it might be no surprise to us that for the first test in Perth between Australia and South Africa, Nathan Hauritz would not be picked. Jason Krejcier was chosen instead, but on the balance of things, perhaps that was fair enough too. South Africa brought over one of its strongest ever sides to tour Australia, with the likes of Smith, Umla, Callis, de Villiers, Steyn, Entini and others. In the first test, Mitchell Johnson took 8 for 61 in South Africa's first innings, putting Australia 94 runs ahead as they batted again. The Aussies ended up setting them 414 runs to win.
Like about in Chibi.
Goes again. The man standing, could be, it can't be out, it's gone. It's another one.
And they got it. Graham Smith and AB de Villiers in an absolute masterclass at the whacker, both scoring centuries, chasing it with only 4 wickets down.
Coming back. That will do it. What a famous victory that is for South Africa.
Jason Krejcier wouldn't have a rerun of his debut. He was the most expensive bowler in Perth, with innings of 1 for 102 and none for 84 respectively. In just his mid-20s, this would be, perhaps harshly, the last test of his career. Although Hauritz would be back in the second test, Australia had bigger problems than their spin options coming into that game. Dale Steyn took centre stage during the Boxing Day test. He took 5 wickets in the first innings, before JP Duminy knocked a sumptuous 166 to help the Proteas to 459 all out, leading by 65 runs. Steyn then came back in the second to take 5 more, 10 wickets for the match. That was his 3rd time he'd ever taken a 10-wicket haul up to that point. A target of 183 runs was set for the Proteas, chased down in under 3.5 hours. South Africa had won the series 2-0 with a game in hand.
Gone! 10 wickets for Steyn. What a performance on the MCG.
This was their first ever series win down under in history, and their latest series win against Australia since 1970. That's before their exclusion from international cricket during apartheid. A massive achievement. The enormity of this loss would cause a huge media frenzy in Australia. Nathan, if you wanted to know, actually didn't go too bad, but he was only a minute fraction of the focus. With their first home series defeat in 16 years, there was plenty of vitriol to be spread around from the local press. As you can see from this lovely graphic published in Sydney's Daily Telegraph newspaper, every part of how that result came to pass, both on and off the field, was catching some sort of flack. Australia would actually win the last test in Sydney, but I don't know about you, but all I seem to remember was what Graeme Smith did out in the middle. On day 2, he copped one from Mitchell Johnson, which hit him on the hand. A nasty one. He would leave the field, retiring hurt, eventually finding out that it was fractured. But on day 5, South Africa were 9 for 257, trying to bat out the day for a draw. After Andrew McDonald pinned Dale Steyn in front for 28, the only man left in the sheds was the Proteas captain. He got that cast cut off and put his pads on, trying to save the test. And with a gargantuan effort, he got it down to the last 2 overs of the day, before Mitchell Johnson would secure the win. The Aussie crowd standing to applaud, not only the victory, but what Graeme Smith had done in front of their eyes. That summer would be the end of Brett Lee, Andrew Symonds and Matthew Hayden's test careers. Even though Lee would be in contention for some tests after that, he would never make it back into the side. It's a shame that these 3 didn't get the sort of final walk into the sunset that their test teammates did at the start of our video. Their departures meant that 3 more key structural pillars of that side were now gone. Not to mention one of them a de facto frontline spinner at times in our story. Yet we are still yet to see who would take Warnie's spot full time. Australia would follow them back across the Indian Ocean as the Proteas hosted them in a 3-test series. And it's crazy when you look at how much this side has changed in only these few short years that we've been here. Just have a look. Comparing 07 to 09 side by side, there's only 3 people left. And that's not including all of the spinners that we've gone through in the process. But if you pay close attention to that 09 list, who isn't there? Yep, Nathan Horrocks. He and Bryce McGain would be picked in the squad, but Marcus North would replace Andrew Symonds' role in the middle order. A very good bat, and one who could roll his arm over when needed. The boundaries of the cricket field would be the closest Horrocks would get to the action, as Australia would take revenge on the Proteas in the shortest time frame possible, winning the first 2 tests.
Oh, what a way to end. Steyn has charged indiscriminately, he's been undone, Caddice gets his 3rd. As Australia keep their #1 post. They have beaten South Africa here at Kingsmead by 175 runs. They have clinched the series.
In Cape Town, around a week before his 37th birthday, Bryce McGain would get his long-awaited test debut for Australia. Sadly, it wouldn't go as he hoped. After dismissing Australia for 209, South Africa would only bat once, scoring 651 runs all out. Ashwell Prince, Jacques Kallis and AB de Villiers all scoring triple figures. Every Aussie bowler that innings got at least 1 wicket, except McGain. He had figures of none for 149 off 18 overs, an economy rate of 8.27 and over. After waiting so long for his debut, through injuries, being in Australian squads but not getting picked, and biding his time down the pecking order, the 7th spinner chosen in our story would only get 1 test appearance. It had been over a year and a half since that dreaded day at the start of our video, and we have seen that Australian cricket has been on a rocky road to say the least. But in mid-2009, their paths would cross with England once more. Andrew Strauss's England would host the 2009 Ashes series. This fiery, tense and enthralling series might get a video of its own one day, for just how good it was, so I won't spoil all the best bits. But I will highlight 3 very important points relevant to us. First was that Nathan Horrocks was the only dedicated spinner to be picked in this squad, and he was picked for the first test. Not only that, he took 6 wickets, the most out of all of the Aussies in that match. Secondly, in the second test, while trying to take a return catch off Andrew Strauss, Nathan Horrocks would dislocate a finger on his right hand. It was one of his spinning fingers too, leaving the field. He would eventually return and bowl, taking 3 for 80 in the second innings.
Edged to slip.
Finally was that the selectors, continually looking to tinker with the side with an eye on conditions. Nathan Horrocks was the odd man out in the last 2 tests, with our old theory from before being preferred instead. And that choice, in the 5th test in particular, was a mistake, because the selectors had misread the conditions and they said so after the match. And Horitz's direct English opponent, Graham Swan, took 8 wickets for the match. The final test clinching the series for England 2-1, and the urn was staying in England. Now England would go on an undefeated streak after that Ashes of 7 series on the trot. We might even see them again before our story ends. Nathan was back in the 11 for the first home test of the summer, and for the first time since Warne retired, they picked the same spinner for all 6 tests of their home season, going undefeated in the process. He was the equal highest wicket taker with Mitchell Johnson for the test summer. That streak extended into March with another 2-0 series win in New Zealand, which also brought a milestone of sorts for us too.
Yeah! Well done, brilliant cricket. This is class from Nathan Horitz's.
During the time frame that we've covered, all of the other candidates in this video, from McGill to McGain, had played a combined number of 14 matches for Australia. Nathan had now played 14 matches himself, 8 of them in one go. For many, this might look like a genuine candidate had finally been found. But even now, the merry-go-round was still quietly spinning in the background. While the time for this ride to end is getting close, it wasn't over just yet. Nathan Horitz should have been playing his 15th test match of our story in England against Pakistan. But during the ODI series beforehand, he would experience a recurrence of an old foot injury. He was out for the tests, hoping to recover for an upcoming trip to India. For the first time in a while, a new person enters stage left, someone you might know a bit more about. Making waves in the domestic scene was a young man by the name of Stephen Smith. His wicket-taking leg spinners and batting prowess in the limited overs had earned him a test call-up for Australia. Similar to Bo Casson, he was picked to back up Horitz in this Pakistan series. Smitty only bowled in the second Pakistan innings of that test, but partnered with Marcus North, they took 9 wickets between them, Smith getting 3 for 51. Not bad at all. And speaking of people that you might recognise, have a look who's behind the stumps for this one.
There we go. There we go. That is what they were looking for, and Marcus North has provided it.
The series finished 1-1, and Australia's first choice spinner recovered to join Australia in India. But it wouldn't end well for Australia or Nathan Horitz. With bowlers like Horitz, their most valuable asset is the control that they can offer a captain. Of course, they take wickets, but not necessarily as regular as others. And that can be tolerated for a captain when it leads to winning matches. But in situations where captains need more than that from their dedicated spinner, we start to see its limitations. This 2-test series in India was a prime example. Now this wasn't on Nathan alone. The selectors picked him as the lone spinner in India, when the home team he's facing had 2. While Pragyan Ojha and Harbhajan Singh were coming up with vital wickets, he wasn't having the same success, and lost that vital control of his in the process. India won the first test, and India's spinners accounted for 8 of those 20 wickets. In the second, including part-time spin, it was 13 wickets for India compared to 3 for Australia. Nathan took 6 for 390 between the 2 tests, at an average of 65. Earlier, we left India with an Aussie bowler who took 12 for 358 in just one match. Even though I still argue that Australia didn't set him up for success in this series, Nathan Horitz's 15th and 16th matches with us would be the last that we see of him in this video. England at home were their next opponents, and apart from the performances, there was other reasons why Nathan Horitz wouldn't be picked again. The selectors were working with another idea that the ball spinning away from the bat would be a tougher task for England's strong middle order, all of them right-handers, but with a particular focus on someone like Kevin Pietersen. For that task, they wouldn't pick Steve O'Keefe, a left-arm finger spinner who not only dismissed KP in the tour match, but hit nearly 100 runs and took 4 wickets as well, and would become the leading spin bowler in the Sheffield Shield that season. Instead, they chose another lefty in Xavier Doherty, someone whose stock was definitely rising in Australia, but more for his potential in the limited overs formats. Doherty took 2 for 148 over the course of that first drawn test match. But actually, you might remember it more for what Peter Siddle did on his birthday.
Crowd cheers. Here's Siddle. Oh, well, bowler's close. He's given him! He's given him!
The second test match in Adelaide would be a resounding innings win to England. England put on 620 declared in the first innings, And while Doherty did manage to get Kevin Peterson, he only did so after he scored 227 runs in the process. Xavier Doherty's career would finish with 61 days and 11 T20 internationals for Australia. But his figures in this test of 1 for 158 off 27 meant that the selectors had seen enough of him to look for other options. Steve Smith was chosen for Perth but didn't bowl. In Melbourne, he went none for 71 off 18, and by the time they got to Sydney, where conditions usually favour two spinners, the English were already packing the urn in their suitcases.
That's it. Yes, that's it. Up goes the finger, and England have retained the Ashes.
All Australia could hope for was to draw the series 2-2. This was Nathan Horitz's home ground, and he had recent form behind him, averaging 26.8 in the Shield that season, and scoring 2 centuries. But perhaps with that idea of left arm spin from before, selectors instead went with Michael Beer. Against the best English side of the modern era, Australia lost by an innings and 83 runs, the 3rd innings loss of the series, England winning it 3-1. Well, I think it might be time to be a bit more philosophical. 10. That's how many different spinners Australian selectors have chosen in the past 4 odd years. They've gone for wrist spin, finger spin, right and left-handed, older bowlers, younger bowlers, those who attack more and those who defend more. They've even tried to pick a player with a number of first-class appearances that you can literally count on your hands. Not that any of this is on him, but none of them have lasted. We've seen the outcomes of these events. The merry-go-round, the results on the field, the streaks that have been broken. Not to mention just a glimpse of the public negativity that the players and the selectors have experienced as a result. What if I said to you that all of these attempts would indirectly lay the groundwork for what would happen next? And maybe set the stage to pick who they did for pick number 11. Number 11 would have state cricket experience, but he had recently moved interstate, not to play cricket per se, but to work as a curator at a cricket stadium, and actually bowled in the nets to the local state side, before getting scouted by that team's coach and picked into their Big Bash squad, where they would eventually win the tournament. Within 6 odd months, number 11 would make his first class debut mid-season and then got picked for Australia's tour of Sri Lanka. Just a few months later, number 11 was Nathan Lyon. This is the first ball of his test career, and that is Kumar Sangakkara.
Oh, and he's got a wicket first ball. Yes, he's got a wicket first ball.
Nathan Lyon's test career is a story for another day. But Nathan has now had more than a decade as a key pillar of a new Australian test side. One that has not only won the World Test Championship, but regained and defended the Ashes.
Oh, yeah, straight after the rain break.
It hasn't all been smooth sailing, but his 129 test caps, 530 test wickets and 32,761 test deliveries have helped him become a leader, magician, match winner and security blanket of his own. That merry-go-round has been put out the back somewhere, gathering dust for 13 odd years. But just like some of the things that give it power, Father Time, poor form, selectors and injuries, it hasn't gone anywhere. The next time a great of your team and our sport calls time on their careers, another one of those dreaded days may be around the corner to fire up the merry-go-round once more. When that happens, remember the journey that me and you have just been on, because as we've seen, it's not as simple as swapping one player for another. Indeed, it can be much, much more complicated than that. Hey guys, thanks for staying all the way to the end of the video. If you liked it, please leave a thumbs up down below and subscribe if you're new. The time period that we are covering here in this video intersects with other events that we've already covered on this channel. For instance, if you want to learn more about that Ashes series at the very start of our video, which kicked off this whole thing, click here. Or if you want to see what happened in the aftermath of the 2010-11 Ashes, and in particular to a certain Mitchell Johnson, click here. And until we see each other again, take care, and I'll see you soon.